Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Ladies and gentlemen, I am delighted to be here today to take part in this important conference and to speak in this session on Churchill and Islam. Churchill's involvement in the Sudan was an important aspect of his amazing life. Churchill showed a remarkable degree of insight into the religion of Islam. One of his earliest and deepest encounters with Muslims came in 1898, when he was attached as a soldier and journalist to Kitchener's great expeditionary force to conquer the Sudan and avenge the death of Gordon. There he came face to face with Mahdism. The Mahdi was not only waging a war against the corrupt Turkish Empire, but was leading a revolution to reform the whole of Islam. The Mahdi saw himself not just as a Sudanese national leader, but as the expected savior that the Prophet Muhammad has promised the Muslim world, that will come, achieve justice, and show the true path for the faithful in difficulties and despair. The Mahdi claimed that he had received direct inspiration from the Prophet Muhammad, and that his divine path was to revive the path of the Quran and the Sunnah, and to establish a new doctrine for the future of Islam. Mahdism was a reformation movement within the Muslim world. It had no quarrel with Christianity or any other religion, nor was it a movement against the West as such. But British colonialism inevitably brought them into conflict. When Churchill arrived in Sudan in 1898, he would have heard all about the Mahdi's relations of Gordon, who was killed, not murdered, in a battle in 1885. The Mahdi deliberately prolonged the siege of Khartoum just in order to give Gordon the chance of changing his mind. He went as far as to say, please do not commit suicide, because the military situation was really suicidal. Churchill noted in the River War that General Gordon proposed to visit the Mahdi himself and to arrange matters with him personally, Perhaps he recognized a kindred spirit, but of course he wasn't allowed to do that. He was forbidden from going to the Mahdi and meeting him. The correspondence between the Mahdi and General Gordon, together with General Gordon's journals, shed an interesting light in their relationship. Gordon's first letter to the Mahdi shows that he thought the Mahdi was simply seeking power and control over the West, and proposed that he become ruler of the West. But he missed the point that Mahdism was something else. Gordon's last letter to the Mahdi was much reconciliatory. After all, the two men were not so far apart. In contrast to the aggressive tone of his previous letters, Gordon told the Mahdi that he would open the gates of Khartoum and allow its citizens to go over to the Mahdi, because he was sure that he will treat them well. The Mahdi himself died 6 months later. But the Mahdi state continued under the leadership of his first Caliph, Abdullah. Now, the force mobilized by Kitchener against the Mahdi had far more advanced weapons and logistics than Africa had ever experienced before. Maxim guns, gunboats, railways, etc. So the Battle of Omdurman, as Churchill points out, was very easily won, but at the expense of being the bloodiest massacre ever, one of the bloodiest massacres ever. The bravery and martyrdom of some 25,000 Mahdists, armed only with spears and obsolete rifles, who tried to stand up to a far superior colonial army equipped with Maxim guns, is still an event commemorated in my country, the Sudan. There are many books written about the Battle of Omdurman from a military perspective, but none has the depth and insight that is in the River War. The River War is a familiar book now with all Sudanese because it has been translated twice. And this translation really fulfills one of Churchill's wishes, because when he met my father in 1952, he offered him a copy of the River War and asked him if it will be translated into Arabic. The translations came decades later. Compared to General Gordon, Churchill exhibited in this book considerable understanding of the influence of Mahdi, or significance of the Mahdism and Islam. Yet he was very harsh and critical on the Mahdist state, which he called the Dervish Empire. Now, dervish, to call the Mahdist dervish, was forbidden by law in the Mahdist state. It is thought to be a contemptuous term. It is surprising that Churchill dismissed the soldiers of Islam as savage, fanatic, barbarians, and superstitious, but he had great ideas about the bravery of the Sudanese. He said their bravery was never equaled, but surpassed. Was never surpassed. In spite of his critical opinion of the Mahdist state, Churchill's assessment in the River War was a positive one of the Mahdi. He did not share the views of those who thought the Mahdi was merely a commonplace religious impostor, noting that the Mahdi has achieved significant triumphs in his lifetime and deserved to be regarded as one of the heroes of his race. Churchill also described the Mahdi as a man of considerable nobility of character, a priest, a soldier, and a patriot who had won great battles, stimulated and revived religion, diminished slavery by changing slaves into soldiers, and by holding the brotherhood of the Muslims between slaves and non-slaves. Churchill went even further in showing his sympathy for the Mahdi and in his introduction to a book, The Mahdi of Allah, written by a German, Richard Bannerman. He stressed there that the Mahdi was inspired by a sincere religious enthusiasm and wanted to establish the rule of the saints. Ladies and gentlemen, the relationship between the Mahdists and Great Britain took a dramatic turn after the First World War. In return to the son of the Mahdi, Sayyid Abdurrahman's support of the British in the First World War, the British lifted up all restrictions imposed on the Mahdis. There came a kind of truce between them. In 1919, a historic meeting took place between my father and King George V and Sayyid Abdurrahman, who came to London as part of the delegation to congratulate the British on success in the war. The former bitter enemies were miraculously now friends. A new, more positive phase in their relationship began, in which Sayyid Abdurrahman, my father, revived Mahdism, but renounced the use of violence. He visited the United Kingdom a number of times to discuss independence with British governments. In 1952, my father, Sayyid Abdurrahman, came to London to pursue these negotiations. He had a memorable meeting with Churchill, of which there is a photograph, which Jim has just shown you. In that photograph, Churchill made a noble gesture of respect to the Mahdi. He hid his cigar and told the photographer, "Stop, I cannot allow you to photograph me with a cigar in my mouth with the Mahdi's son who prohibited smoking." We are very proud of that picture, and we keep saying, had Churchill had his cigar on, we probably would find it very difficult to exhibit the picture anyway. At this meeting, Churchill offered all possible support from the British for the Sudan independence. When he got to Cairo to continue negotiations with the other condominium party, Egypt, Sayyid Abdurrahman was in a very strong position because of British support of independence and of overwhelming support from the Sudanese, of course. The Egyptians initially tried to insist on retaining nominal sovereignty over the Sudan, but eventually backed down and agreed to the Sudan self-determination immediately. The agreement between the Mahdi's son and the Egyptians formed the basis of the Anglo-Egyptian agreement over the Sudan in 1953. The British had not expected the Egyptians to renounce their claim to sovereignty so abruptly. Churchill was not so happy with that agreement, but was wise enough not to try to sabotage it, and eventually allowed the Sudan to gain its independence peacefully in 1956. Ladies and gentlemen, despite the brutal nature of the Battle of Omdurman, the insights and understandings of Mahdism and Islam displayed in Churchill's writings and his role in enabling Sudan to get its independence in the 1950s, these have left Churchill with a great positive reputation among Sudanese. Sayyid Abdurrahman wrote in his memoirs, I quote, "I have, from my experience in contact with the British, discovered that some are guided by a noble spirit of humanity that illuminates their path. He who dismisses the British as a bunch of pirates or fanatics who only look for the interests of their empire have done gross injustice. In Europe, as in the East, there are some who are dedicated to sincerity and goodwill. Upon such leaders rests the hope of the future of the world." Unquote. Ladies and gentlemen, men like Sir Winston Churchill are foremost among such leaders. It is my privilege to have the opportunity at this conference to offer my own tribute to Churchill's memory. Thank you very much.
Well done.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.